I said, dad dying, baby born with a tumor, autism, postpartum depression, being violated by somebody I trusted. All of these things were intensely traumatic.
And they often say that the most successful entrepreneurs, it's not about skills, it's actually the mindset, and the mindset not to give up.
I think for a long time, I'm like, life is supposed to be easy. It's not. And I think once I accepted that, a lot changed. If you don't enjoy being with that person as much as you enjoy being with yourself, then don't do it. But be open to the experience and realize you can find somebody. If that's what you want to do, like I said, if you're consistent and if you're putting yourself out there and you're living your life and enjoying it, you'll be fine. I survived all these things and was continuing to grow my business in the meantime. That as long as I continued to stay true to myself and trust myself, then things would be okay, even if they weren't easy.
Can you truly open your heart to love when you're still healing from everything life threw at you? On this episode of P.S I Love Me, I'm joined by the fabulous Joanna Wynes, who's a CEO, top legal consultant, and someone who knows just firsthand what it takes to rebuild your life after postpartum struggles, divorce, and raising a child with special needs. Professionally, Joanna helps people navigate life-changing moments, catastrophic injuries, complex settlements, and guides them towards security during their most vulnerable times. But her expertise isn't just professional, she's lived it. And behind the success, Joanna was battling to hold it all together whilst her own life fell apart. Through that journey, she learned something profound. Healing isn't linear, and finding love again requires you to trust yourself again. Today, Joanna has found love after divorce, but it wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy in areas and required deep work to rebuild her self-worth and learn what healthy love really is and what it really looks like. So today we're going to be talking about rebuilding identity when life doesn't go to plan, how trauma may show up in relationships even when you think you've moved on, the difference between being ready for love and forcing yourself to be, and what it takes to open your heart again without losing yourself. So if you've been through divorce, heartbreak, or major life upheaval, and you're wondering if you'll ever feel whole again or ever want to find love again, then this conversation is for you. Let's dive in with Joanna Wynes. Joanna, it's so amazing to have you on this podcast. I've been really looking forward to this, and you're an incredible lady, and you're full of resilience, and I can't wait to get stuck in.
Thank you so much, Lynda, for having me. I'm so happy to be here and to share whatever it is I can to hopefully help other people and just, let other people know that they're not alone, because life is really hard and there's a lot of things people just don't talk about enough.
And it's having those difficult conversations and being vulnerable and sharing your story is what makes the difference for other people being seen and heard. But let's dive into what you've been through. So you've navigated a lot, your postpartum struggles, divorce, raising a child with special needs, all whilst building your business and career. What was it like going through all of that?
It was very hard. I started my business in 2016, and at the end of 2016, I was pregnant with my first child, and then my dad actually got diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And so he ended up passing away several months later. It was about 8 weeks after I had my first child. And then my son, when he was born, he actually had a tumor on his spine that we were not anticipating. We didn't know. It didn't show up on any of the prenatal testing. And so then I had to follow up with oncology for the first 3 years of his life. And then he was diagnosed with autism in the midst of it. So there was a lot of trauma, and my relationship, I was with my ex-husband. We were together for almost 21 years, and we were just moving through life, but I think we were just kind of surviving. I was trying to build my business. I felt, very alone and isolated. I think many times I faced a lot of rejection when I first started my business, trying cold calling people, cold emailing them, trying to get attention, and just, getting the doors closed on my face.
Yeah. And when it
And
came to feeling alone and isolated and rejected, what was it that you think that kept you going?
I think, I grew up and my parents, like, my dad got sick before he had cancer. He got sick with some other things, and it really derailed our lives. We lost our childhood home. There was a lot of economic instability, and I just did not want that for my life. I did not want that for my future, for my kids, my future children. Um, so I just had this determination. I was like, I know I can do this. And I was a lawyer for 10 years. I was practicing medical malpractice and products liability in a formal legal sense. And I hated it. I was miserable. I was truly in some abusive work type situations, which I can see now in retrospect, but I thought maybe it was kind of normal at the time. So then and I always wanted to get in, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to sell. I wanted to do something else. So once I found what I wanted to do, I was just determined to do it. I knew I could do it. It was really scary. I don't know that I had the necessarily emotional capacity at that time to handle the rejection, but I just could not give up because that's just not, it's just not me. When I have something I want to do, I just do it.
Yeah. And they often say that the most successful entrepreneurs, it's not about skills, it's actually the mindset and the mindset not to give up. That is the difference between success and failure often.
Absolutely. And I saw something the other day where someone said, sales people and entrepreneurs are the most highly paid people, really, kind of across the board. And it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't take you don't necessarily need to be the most brilliant mind in the room, or you don't need to get straight A's, or you don't need to, have something that's you don't have to have an idea that's so incredibly novel, but you do have to be able to stand getting rejected over and over and over and over and over and over again, and not letting it take a toll on your self-esteem. And I remember when I was doing that and I was, getting all these rejections from people, and people, telling me to go away and go, basically F myself. I remember thinking, I was like, this is going to be really good this would be really good practice if I ever had to date again. Because, just dealing with that it's hard. It is hard. And to be able to just keep going when that keeps happening is hard. But then I think once you start to get a little bit of momentum, and once you start getting a little bit of positive traction, and you're getting closer, you're making progress, and it might not be as fast as you want it to be, and it might not look how you want it to go, but you keep making those gains and getting closer to the finish line, then you're on the right path, and you just have to keep going.
Yeah. And whilst you were doing that, your personal life was also turned upside down with everything that was going on, postpartum, divorce. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like what unraveled and how did you deal with it?
I would say, so I said I had my son about a year after I started my business, and then I had my daughter at the end of 2019. And I think with having gone through what I went through with him, and with my dad passing away right after he was born, and with his medical issues, when my daughter was born, I just felt completely overwhelmed and incapacitated and scared of what was going to happen, and was she going to be okay? And I didn't feel like I had emotional support, and I ended up for months, I just laid in bed and I cried, and under the covers with my lights off. And my business wasn't that big at that time. I didn't have a ton of clients, but I was getting more and more. So that was the only thing that got me out of bed at that time. And I would show up to events, and people could tell that I wasn't myself. And I was really fortunate that somebody called me after they saw me one day and they're just like, "You're not yourself. And are you okay?" And I'm trying to fake it because I've always been good at putting on a happy face and
The mask.
doing the thing, right? Masking,
Yeah.
in every way. But the mask clearly was not holding up at that point in time. And so, somebody who's actually one of my clients, she intervened along with another woman, and I ended up going on. Briefly, I went on antidepressants and I sought some therapy for support, and it helped me move forward. And then the whole world shut down with COVID just as I was getting out of that postpartum fog. And that was really hard too, because I remember there was a week it was the beginning of March 2020, and I was invited to go out for a happy hour, and I was planning on going to this happy hour because it was the first time I was starting to feel good enough to get out of the house again. But then at the last minute, I think my anxiety or the depression took over and I couldn't do it. And I didn't go. And then the world shut down a week later. And when that happened, I was wishing so much that I had gone out that last time. Yeah. And I think from there, I kind of had this mindset shift. Like, I never want to turn down an opportunity because you really don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's a good learning from that. You don't know what lies ahead. And
you don't.
Life is certain, is it?
No, it's not, because I'm like, it's a happy hour. There will be others. And then it's like, lo and behold, we're not going to be able to leave our houses for a year after that. But I really did feel alone. And I think part of it was just not having the support that I needed necessarily within the home. And just feeling like I was just going to be emotionally alone with so many things for the rest of my life. But again, at that point, then I had 2 kids, and a house and a family, and I just needed to, again, put the mask back on and do the thing.
And when it comes to the breakdown of your marriage, when did that really come to a head?
I think, during COVID, I think there were some tensions building. It was also hard because my ex he was an essential worker, so he actually was allowed to leave the house, really when nobody else was. And so I just felt like I was losing my mind, and I just had this bad, heavy energy inside of me. And then I think when things kind of started to reopen, or people really started getting back out into the world, maybe in 2022, I would say I just felt this really intense energetic shift, how I felt in the house versus out. And I didn't know why, because my ex, he's a nice person. We have a great co-parenting relationship. We didn't fight a lot, but there was a lot that just wasn't working. And like I said, just seeing that shift after, being in the house for that many years, I just knew something was wrong. And then it was really the beginning of 2023. Something traumatic happened to me with somebody who I had previously trusted, and I started to go to therapy to process it. I had some PTSD as a result. And while I was in therapy, just started talking about my marriage and kind of realized why I was feeling how I was feeling. And then, a few months later, we ended up getting separated. So, of course it was hard. Like I said, we have a great co-parenting relationship, and I appreciate, I appreciate that. And so I don't like to get too into the nitty-gritty of everything that's happened, but again, sometimes you meet somebody, you're 21 years old, 20, you're a child, and they're a child, and you are together and you build, and I think we built a lot together. We have 2 beautiful children. We built some homes. But at the end of the day, it didn't work out. We grew in different directions. And, I think being so young when we got together, we had patterns from our childhood that, you just grow up a certain way and you fall kind of back into the patterns that maybe your parents had or their parents had because you don't know better, right? I think now we are lucky to have podcasts like this and we have social media and there's a lot of relationship advice out there. What to look for, what not to look for, what is a healthy relationship, what's not. But, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, we didn't have that. And people didn't talk about their marriages. People didn't talk about what it's supposed to look like. And so really the only models I think we had were, what went on in our own families and what we saw on TV.
Hollywood romance, the rom-coms, that's what healthy relationships look like. And nowadays we've got access to more information and more tools available, but we've also got social media with everyone else posting their, in inverted commas, perfect relationships and lives, which adds an extra layer of complexity, comparison, self-comparison, self-worth on top of what we're already navigating. So it's tough.
It's really tough. And I think, I know you and I are similar age ranges and everything like that. And I still think when we grew up, society was still very patriarchal and, women still weren't necessarily expected to be breadwinners or, the stay-at-home mom, working father was still, I think, kind of the model maybe when we were growing up. It started to shift a little bit, but again, those patterns, I think they carry in. And I'll say, not just obviously we had the rom-coms, right? We have these intense, passionate, exciting relationships that we see on TV that now we know the most intense ones are probably the most toxic. But then, I watch American sitcoms, right? Family sitcoms. And it's always, the husband goes to work and he comes home and he's, miserable and he wants his beer and sitting on the couch, right? And the wife is nagging him. And that's the model you see. You're like, okay, this is just what happens in marriage, right? And it becomes very normalized, but that's really not normal. It's not healthy, but that's kind of, I think, what I would always see. Those were always what I would see as patterns in relationships. Back then.
So going through all of this, the divorce with the backdrop of obviously the PTSD, you'd had your postpartum struggles, all whilst building your empire. How did what are some tips and ways that you feel that you got through all of that? I know you said, I kind of had to show up, but obviously you became stronger and more resilient, and things settled after a while. But what were some of the things that you did that helped you along the way?
Well, I did therapy when I had postpartum, but I can't say at that point I was really into it because I felt almost forced into it just because I didn't know what else to do. And I don't know that I got as much out of it at that point as I needed, but having medication for a little while to get me through that hump and get my life back to normal helped. I was really anti going on antidepressants and I'm not on them now, but at that time it was what my body needed. And it allowed me to start kind of getting out of the house again and, getting back to myself so that, I was able to eventually wean off of it. But I would say, anyone who is suffering with something, mental health wise, talk to somebody. There's nothing wrong with it. You're not broken. You're not weird. There's nothing bad about it. It just actually helps you become better. And then, like I said, when I really dove into therapy in 2023 and knew that I just needed to change, I needed something to change. My life was just not working. I really opened myself up. I opened my heart and I just got real. And I think there were so many times in my life, I think, where I felt that life wasn't fair or why is all of this happening to me and why have I had to go through trauma after trauma after trauma? And why do other people have it easy?
Yeah. I felt like
And
that as well in my life. It's like, oh, this again? Why is it always me? Why have I got to deal with the deaths, the divorce, the business being up and down? It's like, give me a break.
yeah, I mean, I felt like that. Like I said, dad dying, baby born with a tumor, autism, postpartum depression, being violated by somebody I trusted. All of these things were intensely traumatic. But then there was a certain point where my mind shifted and I wasn't thinking that life was meant to be easy anymore. I think for a long time, I'm like, life is supposed to be easy. It's not. And I think once I accepted that, a lot changed. I know that sounds simple, I guess, but when you stop really comparing your life to other people's lives and you realize you are on your own journey for whatever reason it is. And again, life's not necessarily about what happens to you, but how you deal with it and how you cope with it.
Yeah. And how you
And
grow
what
with.
you make of it. Then I started to feel more empowered. And then I think knowing that I survived this, I survived all these things and was continuing to grow my business in the meantime, that as long as I continued to stay true to myself and trust myself, then things would be okay, even if they weren't easy.
Yeah. And when it came to dating again, after all you've been through, after the divorce, the PTSD, the postpartum, the getting your business through, all of this, how were those first few dating experiences?
Oh God, they were awful. Awful. I was thinking about it last night and I'm like, the first thing anyone needs to do when they get separated or divorced, and like I said, I was already in therapy, but do more therapy before you get on the apps. Seriously. And I think the dating world would be a lot better and easier if people followed that advice. But, I was in my marriage I was with my ex-husband from the time I was almost 21 till the time I was 42. So I got out and I felt like I was in this new adolescence, and you're, running around and doing, you see these apps and you see all these people and it's like all these shiny objects in your face and you have no freaking idea what, all the bad and weird people who are out there, because if you're not a bad or weird person,
Yeah.
you don't anticipate that other people will be like that.
Yeah. There can be some humility to it.
Yeah. I mean, so I didn't know men. I didn't know men's patterns. I didn't know what toxic patterns were. I just, like I said, I saw all of these men, this whole world. And, then there's all this chemistry. And I think you have all these stress hormones going through your body when you're going through some sort of huge trauma. And so it seems really fun and exciting at first, but I got in some really bad situations the first go around on the app. And now I look back, 3 years later, and it was so dumb. But I just didn't know better.
Yeah. And a lot of it boils down to getting really specific on A, what you want and what you value, B, your own self-awareness,
Right.
what you're triggered by, our patterns, our history, why we do the things that we do. But also being able to spot the red flags and not brush under the carpet, how to communicate when you see a red flag, how to problem solve within those early dating experiences. And that's a lot of the time what makes the difference is the awareness and the communication.
I agree completely with everything you just said. I mean, I can think about, so you get out, people end their marriages for different reasons, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think people have really horrible experiences and maybe they're victims of abuse or they have something really traumatic happen. And then some of those women I find they're scared. They don't want to date again because it's only really led to pain in the past. Yeah. And then sometimes you have a marriage that's just not working, or it's dead, or, whatever happens, or you grow apart. And then you're just kind of out there, and maybe you're finding people who are not similar to your ex. So then you automatically kind of just think, okay, this is the person, or this is so cool. Or you're just really scared to be alone. But it's not healthy. I mean, I ended up in one situation where I went boating with some guy I didn't even know. Why the heck would I ever go into the middle of a body of water with a stranger? Dumb. It was not smart, but at that point I'm like, this is so fun. This is spontaneous. I never would have done this, in my past life. It's a Thursday. We're going out on a boat. Like, how fun, how exciting, And then the guy ended up writing me a song when I got home after the first date, which totally gave me the ick. I had to block him. So there was that. And then I ended up with somebody who was a total narcissist love bomber, but I didn't know the flags. And there was something about the chemistry and the limerence and I don't know, it just felt rebellious, or there was something about it that was off, but it was exciting. And this guy became a total love bomber, extremely possessive after, a week or two. And extracting myself from that, even after, after we ended things after about 3 weeks, was really hard. I mean, I got stalked for almost 2 years after that. I almost had to file for a protective order. I mean, that was terrifying. And after that, I took a break from the apps. I did end up in a relationship with somebody who I knew for a long time thereafter, for about a year. So that was kind of the next phase. But
yeah,
like I said, the first round on the apps were horrible. And I totally would have avoided all of those experiences if I knew myself better and I knew the flags and what to look for and whatnot.
Yeah, but also don't beat yourself up. It's quite common when women come out of a relationship, quite often when it's a lackluster, loveless relationship where there's no emotional warmth or support in there. It can feel good to be love bombed, to have all this attention, to have everything thrown at you. It can feel good when you've been starved of it, but it's important to recognize what is genuine affection and love versus the love bombing, followed by the gaslighting and the unhealthy behavior. But it's not uncommon for that to happen in those situations. And when we're at our most vulnerable as well, if we've come out of a relationship that's left us feeling of low self-worth, of quite vulnerable, and someone comes along in a certain statuesque way with the love bombing, with saying all the right things, giving all the right gifts, whisking you away, being this perfect person on paper, but actually it's not the real them, and it's deep down it's not a healthy approach to a relationship or beginning of a relationship.
Not at all. Not at all.
If you love P.S I Love Me and truly want change in love and life, then join the Evolve Woman program, my 12-week online coaching journey, which will take you on a transformative experience of self-discovery to find the joy, connection, and deep love you so deserve. Just go to lindawilliamscoaching.com to find out more. So when was it that you met your now boyfriend? Tell me a little bit about that, and what do you think you did that helped you find him?
So, like I said, I was in a relationship for about a year and before I met him, and that relationship, there were so many fantastic aspects about it, and I think the person is a wonderful person, but just didn't have the capacity to love me in the way that I needed to be loved. But I think, those inconsistent relationships where, you don't know if they're going to show up, but when they show up, it's always great. That creates its own chemistry, limerence, excitement, stress, relief, all these feelings, right? That one was really hard for me to get over that relationship. And so I would start to go on the apps a little bit after that. And every time I would start talking to somebody, my body just felt like it was on fire. I just felt anxious and it's like, I can't do this. I just cannot do this right now. And then I would delete the apps, and then a couple days would go by and I would get bored and I would get lonely, and then I would reinstall the apps. And then I just decided I needed to take a break. I started following something. I saw something on Facebook called the Burned Haystack Dating Method, created by a woman named Jenny Young, who is a professor of women's rights and rhetoric. She's brilliant. I have, I don't know her in person. I just know her from social media, but she's brilliant and has helped hundreds of thousands of women identify red flags and green flags on dating apps. And I started kind of studying every post that she made, every post that somebody else made, and really learning those methods because I wanted to feel safe on the apps and I wanted to feel better about going back into the dating world. And I learned a lot, and I could see that all of the things that had happened in the past relationships would not have happened had I known about this method, had I known about these flags, had I known all of this. At the same time, I was still working on myself. I was working to become more securely attached. I think I had a little bit of anxious attachment, nothing overwhelming. I didn't get, crazy or possessive, but, I was searching, and I wanted to feel like I always would have somebody to complete me. And that's not the best position to be in, because if you need a placeholder, you need somebody to really help you regulate, you're not necessarily going to be in a position to pick the best.
Yeah.
Partner.
And you're right. And when it comes to self-worth, feeling whole within yourself and not needing a partnership to complete you, that's when you're choosing from a secure place. And when you understand your triggers, as you were saying, the anxious attachment style, what specifically may trigger you, you're aware of that. So when it comes up in early dating, you're aware of how to handle it, and also triggers versus actual red flags, because sometimes we're triggered and it is a red flag. Don't ignore that red flag. So it's actually good to get a little bit triggered in some situations, because that is our gut instinct saying, hey, no, stay away. And being connected to that self, to that gut instinct, is a huge thing in itself, because quite often we're cut off from how we're even feeling, because we're numb. We've been through so much, we don't even know how we feel anymore. But reconnecting with ourselves to be able to make these decisions, understanding if we're led with our head, heart, or gut brain, is actually essential when you're navigating the dating world.
100%. And I think women so often are taught to ignore their intuition to make other people happy or comfortable. And I was a codependent people pleaser. I just was. Doesn't make me a bad person. I think a lot of women like that, but it's not good for relationships at all. It's not helpful in finding a healthy relationship at all. And I think when I was on the apps, for some reason at the beginning, I just had such a hard time turning people down, I don't know why. I'd get scared or think they were going to freak out at me, or I would just waste so much time and energy over these random strangers on the apps. And why? Like,
and
why?
When you're a good person and someone's into you and you're not into them, the guilt and not wanting to hurt them. And actually, I cover that in the Evolve Woman program, is when you're dating, how to let someone down in a genuine and kind way, so they can open up their world to find the right person, because it's no good being with you because you're not into them and you want them to find someone who finds them equally attractive. And that's some of the hard parts of dating, is communicating, not just when problems and issues come up, not just about putting the stall out early on in terms of what you do and you don't want, but actually letting the other person down in a nice way. I'm so into anti-ghosting as well. I think the
Same.
dating world needs to have some rules and regulations about how you communicate and what is and isn't okay.
I agree with you entirely. I don't like ghosting at all, and I think it's such an emotionally immature behavior. But I think that sometimes if you meet somebody toxic and you
Yeah.
do turn them down politely and then they go crazy on you, it does make you a little scared to reject people in the future.
Yeah.
But I think with Burned Haystack, it just empowered me to be like, this isn't working for me, and that's it. This isn't working for me. Best of luck to you in the future. Block.
Yeah.
End of story.
Absolutely.
Never revisit it. Doesn't matter as long as you're safe.
Because as women, we tend to be people pleasers. A lot of my women on my Evolve Woman program, they're people pleasers. They don't have enough boundaries in terms of creating time for themselves, creating more energy for themselves, because they're everything to everyone. They're the boss, the mom, the sister, the daughter.
Right.
They're running the after school clubs. They're everything to everyone without creating that boundary in terms of, what do I actually want? How can I fill my cup up first? Because we all know if our cups full first, we're able to give to everyone else in a much healthier and more meaningful way. But quite often as women, we are people pleasers, and we've had to be, because especially at work, operating in worlds that are and have been built by men to get ourselves a place at that table, we've often had to go above and beyond to be seen, to be trusted, to jump through hoops. And then you get used to doing that and pleasing and doing everything to everyone. So it's sometimes quite a bit of a circuit breaker to get out of that loop and taking baby steps towards, okay, what does a healthy boundary look like for me? Whether it's letting someone down in a genuine, authentic way on a dating app, or creating a boundary in our professional or personal lives to allow more space for ourselves.
Because it was taking so much energy for me to talk. I'm talking to men and wanting to be nice, be the nice girl, or, somebody wanting to communicate with me all throughout the day. And I don't have time for that, or I don't want to do that on the apps with a stranger. But for some reason, when I was still evolving, I would continue to do that. And it took so much out of me. And then I came to a place where I was like, I'm just absolutely not doing this. And the second I see a red flag, the person's gone. If the person doesn't respect my communication style, or, how often I want to communicate, they're not the person for me. I think I also had to be okay with being alone for a while, and I was, completely single for months. I was just catching up with a friend the other day. It was a guy, and he was asking me, did you hook up a lot, when you were single? And I said, no, I really didn't. I just didn't have the interest. I just knew that if I wanted to find a good partner, I could not waste my time with bad ones.
Yeah.
I couldn't fill space with people that I didn't want to have in my life for the long run, because there's really no point in doing that.
No, and that energy can be spent on other more worthwhile areas in your life as well, whether it's your children, working on yourself, making sure that you feel healthy, energized in your heart, in your mind, physically. That's what I always say to my clients, when you enjoy being on your own, do all the things that bring you joy, that lift your vibrations up, that make you feel connected to yourself and your surroundings. Find what brings you joy and do more of that. And then you will find someone. It's inevitable when you're the best version of yourself, even though it sounds cheesy, but it's true. Like when you're the best version of yourself and you redirect your energy into the things that matter, and be a little bit more strategic about your personal life. Because we've all got strategies at work, right? And quite often our personal life is like, woof, just running away with itself. But it's being more intentional with our energy, more intentional with our time, and focusing on what's really going to bring us joy in the present moment.
Absolutely. And so I think when I kind of got to the point where I was ready to be back on the apps and, do it in a strategic way. I I had my list of non-negotiables. I had so many non-negotiables. Obviously the person had to fit, I had to follow the Burned Haystack dating method. So they had to not have any toxic rhetorical patterns. It had to be somebody who was intentional, who was able to lead a conversation and make plans and match my energy. And then I obviously had a list of things personal to me and preferences to me, and they were things I wasn't going to compromise on.
Yeah.
I remember talking to my brother one day, and he said, what are you looking for in a partner? And I listed about probably 75 things. And he's like, your standards are a little high, don't you think? He's like, I don't think you're going to find somebody that has all of these qualities. And I said, these are all things that I do. These are all things that I can bring to a relationship. So I'm not compromising on any of those. I'd rather be by myself.
Yeah.
Than be with somebody who isn't going to meet all that criteria. But I do think there was a certain period of time where I was still trying to maybe replace my ex boyfriend, or, maybe try to find somebody who was similar in certain ways, and that wasn't really the right path. And I had a really good male friend of mine who's about 10 years older than I am, and he went through his divorce maybe just a couple of years before I did, and he was going through his first postmarital, relationship the same time as I was navigating my first one. And then we kind of had breakups at the same time, and we were helping each other kind of with the dating thing. And I was helping him go through the apps, and I was helping him, reject the women who he wasn't interested in a respectful but definitive way. And then he was sharing his insights. And I remember one day he said to me, he's like, Joanna, we're really good friends, and I've decided you're kind of the standard. You and a couple other women are my standard for when I go look for a relationship. And he's like, and I always think, is this woman going to get along with you? Are the two of you going to be friends? Is it going to work out? And like I said, there were a couple other women that he said he had sort of in similar mindset with. And he said, you need to do the same with me. He's like, we're friends. We get along. He's like, find somebody. Don't date somebody if you don't think that we would be friends. And I thought that was great advice. And I started to follow that in my head.
Yeah.
And
if they have the values, I mean, we do something similar in the Evolved Woman program, like you do in Burned Haystack, is get really specific about what you will and won't compromise on,
right.
And the values that you hold dear to yourself and what you really want in a partner. And again, as you were saying, the 7-8 things, like what's your top 3 or 4 that are like, that I am absolutely not compromising on. And then if you see that in a male friend of yours, great idea.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I followed that. And then I ended up a few weeks later, after having really for a long time having no matches, because I was being really discerning, frankly. I mean, there were many, many times that I went through the apps and I would go through every profile and swipe left, and it would say, expand your filters. Like, I'm not expanding my filters. Expand the pool of men. Come on. Make a better pool. But I got to a point where I was talking maybe to 6 or 7 men at the same time, and they didn't have any sort of toxic behaviors. They weren't smothering. We didn't, I went on first dates with a few of them. I went on second dates, with a handful. But I met my current boyfriend now during that process. And I think that's also important. I think people hear about multi-dating or, not talking to just one person at the beginning, and people get weirded out about it. But I find, most people you're not going to really get, if you're being discerning, there's a lot of people you'll go on first dates with and you are not going to go on second dates with them. It's not going to get that far.
Yeah.
And if you have maybe a couple different people that you're going on some casual dates with, for a few weeks, some of them drop off, then you maybe pick somebody else back up. But then you have a comparison. You can tell my energy feels good around this person and it doesn't feel good around this person. And this cadence feels right and this doesn't feel right. And then you really you're at a point where you're choosing, you're not begging for attention. You're you're going on these dates and you're observing. You're not expecting anything. You're not putting too much stock in it. You're not like, this person's going to be my husband. You're just kind of like, I'm going to go out, I'm going to meet this person. Hopefully we'll have a good time and I'll see how they make me feel.
Yeah.
And then we go from there, and that's it.
Agree, and give it some space. And I think being in your feminine energy really helps, instead of going into it with the masculine work energy of interviewing them. What do you do for a living? What's your past relationship history? Yada, yada, yada. It's allowing that space, allowing the curiosity around the conversation, allow it to unfold naturally, observing how they're coming across, the choice of words. And I always say to my clients, you always learn something from each date you go on. You may learn something about what you really do want or don't want in a relationship. You may realize and unfold something more about yourself from that experience, or you may learn about, I don't know, a new industry or a new hobby or interest or a new travel destination that you want to go on next time. You always take something from each dating experience. So the less pressure you put on each experience, the better. Not like, is he going to be the love of my life? I'm just showing up. Let's see, let's be curious, let the situation breathe, and let's see what I learn by the end of this conversation.
For sure. I remember I met my boyfriend at the end of March of 2025. And I remember going on a date in February of 2025, and this guy starts talking about marriage on the first date. And I'm like, no way. I was like, we are just meeting each other. I said, we're out to have fun, get to know each other. And he's like, yeah, but we could. And I'm like, we are not talking about this. And I totally got the ick, and, he ended up getting blocked. But I was just like, let's just be here. Like, let's go out and have fun. And if we have fun, then we can go on a second date. And if we don't have fun, we won't go on a second date. I mean, that kind of was where I was.
Yeah. And I think there's a difference between setting your intentions out honestly on the apps and in those first dates, in terms of, I'm actually looking for a long-term committed relationship, versus I'm looking for something more casual. I think that needs to be communicated before you even go on the first date. Otherwise, what's the point of going out on the first date if you're not aligned in terms of your relationship goals? But absolutely saying, hey, let's get married in if this works out on date number one is ick territory for sure. And it's something that could have been positioned of it. What do you see long term? What do you really value in a partnership, in a relationship? Is marriage a big thing for you? And I think that's why communication is really important on both sides in early dating.
For sure. And I don't think there's anything wrong with casual dating if that's what both people want. Or, people talk about situationships and friends with benefits and things like that. And those situations can get complicated, but sometimes at certain points of your life, that's maybe the right thing for you. But people need to be honest about that. Don't pretend that you want a long-term relationship if that's all you want. If you want to keep it casual and say, I need company and companionship, and maybe I just want a consistent relationship partner or sexual partner, I don't want to sleep around, but I have needs or things like that. That's fine, as long as both people are honest and transparent and on the same page.
Yeah.
And I think also it's okay. There's nothing wrong with saying I am dating to be in a long-term relationship, but I'm dating to be in a long-term relationship with the right person, not any person.
Yes.
And that's where I was. I was at that point where I'm like, I do want to be in a relationship. I do want to have a long-term partner. I don't necessarily have to get married, but I do want that security and I want that commitment. But again, it wasn't going to just be the first man that I go on a first date with.
Yeah.
That's silly.
Yeah, no, and it's going back to communication. And I've had a lot of women who've come to my program who are in situationships. The conversation hasn't been had that they're in a situationship, and they haven't had the hard conversation because they're the ones that wanted something more. they weren't sure where they stood with this other person, and they ended up finishing with it with the person actually in the program, because they worked on themselves, they worked on the self-worth, they worked on what they really want in a relationship. And actually, yeah, I don't want to waste my time with someone who doesn't want the same thing as me. And we're in this
Right.
murky, muddy water, this grey area of is he really wanting a relationship? Should I hang out a bit more if I just prove myself? If I be this
Right.
person, if I try to earn love, he'll finally choose me. And that can be really common in early dating and situationships as well. So that communication and having the confidence and worthiness within to actually say, hey, are we on the same page here? And that's when things unravel and we start discovering more about ourselves, about what we want and what we will and we won't tolerate, and what love really is to us.
And I think, you can identify patterns in very early dating or even just messaging that something is going to become a situationship and it's not going to become a relationship.
Yeah.
I will tell you that, I just knew with my boyfriend that we were going to end up in a relationship. And it's not because he said, I want to be in a relationship with you on date one, or because of anything he necessarily said. But I remember we first started messaging, and I was on Bumble at the time. And, Bumble, they keep changing the apps and how they work. But at that time, the women could have an opening move if they wanted the man to initiate the conversation, or otherwise the woman had to initiate the conversation. And I decided, I'm like, I don't want a man who I have to message first. Because again, if I'm messaging first, I'm putting in too much effort. I'm doing what I've always done in business. I'm trying to move the ball forward. Guess I'm being more in my masculine, and I did want to be in my feminine. So I had the opening move, and it was, what are you looking forward to? What are you most looking forward to? And that was such a great opening move, because there were certain people who would say, my first vacation in 5 years. I'm like, that's never going to work for me. I've now built my life where I work remotely half the time. I travel and I do what I want to do. Or I'm looking forward to getting my cost of living raise. You know what? There's nothing wrong with that, but I just could tell it wasn't going to be somebody aligned with me. Or somebody saying my first date with you or getting married to you. And I'm like, ew, ick, creepy. My now boyfriend, he said he was looking forward to going on a trip to Mexico with 6 of his best childhood friends, as a thank you for something that he had gone through, and they had been supportive. And, I loved everything about that. And then, he asked immediately he responded to the prompt, and then he reciprocated. He asked me what I was looking forward to. And at that time, I had a lot of big things planned, because I really had just finalized my divorce. That time, moved out of the house. Now was adjusting to only having my kids part of the time. And I had all these big trips and music festivals and all these things planned. And I told him about, the big exciting stuff. And he was engaged. And then he said, tell me what else. He's like, so do you have kids? What do you do with your kids? He just was interested in getting to know me, but not in an invasive way, not in an overly intrusive way. And I liked it. He was leading the conversation. He was responding appropriately. The responses that we each had just showed that we had things that were in common. He was consistent, but not annoying. It wasn't like every minute I'm getting an app or a message, or, if I don't respond for 10 minutes, where are you? Oh, did you leave the conversation? But it was just like, I've really enjoyed talking with you today, and I'm, heading to a meeting right now, but let's catch up again tomorrow. Right. So it was just this predictable cadence, even just from the beginning.
Yeah. Consistency,
but still leaving me room to breathe, not feeling smothered, not feeling like somebody who's automatically trying to consume me or wanting something from me. And, we went on our first date, and we just went to a restaurant to have a drink. It was a Sunday. And then we figured, if it went well, then we could move on to some other destinations. And so we ended up then going to an arcade that was right next door, which I'm not a huge arcade person, but I found that is an incredible first date. There's so much that you can pick up and learn about a man in that setting. Are they competitive? Are they supportive? Are they generous? Are they fun-loving? Are they able to relax?
Yeah.
How do they treat you? And I was at this arcade with my boyfriend, and he, bought tokens and everything for us to use for the games. And we had a ton of quarters, and, we played for a half hour, and he was asking me, what game do you want to do next? He wasn't trying to control it. He was asking me what did I want to do? And then he saw there was a game that I was kind of struggling with because I had my purse on me, and he held my purse. And then we still had some quarters left at the end. And I was like, do you want to keep playing? He's like, let's go get dinner. And I said, but you still, I was like, but we still have all this money that you just spent, for this. Not that it was, an outrageous spend. And he's like, it's okay. And he went over to a family who had a couple young kids, and he was like, can I give your kids the rest of the tokens? And they're like, sure. And so he did that. And I just loved everything about it. I mean, we had a little healthy competition on some of the games, but it was just, like I said, so telling. And then we went on to another bar. And then at the end of the first date, he just said, he was like, I had a great time with you. I would like to see you again. And then I was about to get on my calendar. He's like, you don't have to tell me, he's like, you don't have to tell me right now. He's like, just when you get a chance, let me know. And it just developed this consistency. I never had to overthink. I didn't have to analyze anything. I didn't need to talk to a therapist to say, what does this mean that he did this? I didn't have any of that.
Yeah. And that's when when your nervous system is calm, when you're not overanalyzing, you're not asking, what did that actually mean? And also in those situations, he's showing you who he is. Actions always speak louder than the words in the text. And showing you that he's thoughtful, he's caring. And I always say, look at how they treat people that are either beneath them, service staff, people that can't do anything for them. And the fact that they gave those spare quarters to a family out of generosity, it's an early sign that, okay, yeah, tick. He's generous, he's caring, he's thoughtful around other people, not just me. And those are the early signs of a healthy relationship.
Yeah, and it just was great. And then, I think we went on 1 to 2 dates for about 5 or so weeks. And again, he never smothered me, and he never made me feel like I was getting love bombed. And at some point he said to me, he's like, I'm not on the apps anymore. But he also didn't say you need to be off. He didn't impose any demands. There was no controlling, there was no directives. But at that point I said, I am too. And I think we just kind of had this mutual understanding. And like I said, I think non-negotiables for anyone you have to have consistency. You have to have presence. You shouldn't have somebody who is making you do anything that you're not comfortable with. And that is the absolute bare minimum.
Yeah, it comes down to trust.
Trust, right? Safety.
Yeah. And as we're wrapping up this podcast, you've shared such a raw and amazing experience. It will be very, very helpful for other ladies, I'm sure. But for women listening to this who are perhaps rebuilding themselves after trauma, after divorce, after being really hurt, and they're wondering, can I trust anyone again? Can I feel loved again? What advice would you give them?
I would say that you absolutely can. It will take time. Finding a relationship is easy, but finding the right one is going to take time. So be comfortable with yourself. Be okay. You have to be okay with being alone. And once you are okay with being alone, then if you enjoy your own company so much, then when you go out on dates, if you don't enjoy being with that person as much as you enjoy being with yourself, then don't do it. But be open to the experience and realize you can find somebody if that's what you want to do. Like I said, if you're consistent and if you're putting yourself out there and you're living your life and enjoying it, you'll be fine. But sometimes it does take work, and it's not, just a bunch of swiping. It's really being intentional, thinking about what you want.
Yeah.
Who are you? What is going to make you happy? And then I think the pieces do eventually, fall into place.
Yeah, exactly. Who are you? Self-awareness, falling in love with yourself first, being comfortable in your own company first, and then the right relationship will follow.
Yeah. And I guess one more, I know we're wrapping up, but if you have male friends, if you have good male friends, spend time around them and see how they treat you, and observe behaviors that you do like and see what you don't like. And I think that helps, again, when you go out into the dating world again. If a man is not treating you with the same respect or the same care that your friends who don't want anything from you are doing, then again, get rid of them. And if they do align, then there may be somebody to, keep talking with.
Yeah. And looking at, if I was my best friend, how would I want to be treated? Quite often, those rules and regulations don't apply to ourselves the way we treat other people. But I always say, imagine you were your own best friend. Like, how would you be treating yourself right now? And how does that show up in dating and relationships? Because you want the best for yourself, right? You want the best for your best friend when they're dating, but that should also apply to yourself. So it's looking at keeping to your standards that you've set, keeping to those values, dating with intention instead of stabbing in the dark. It's being intentional about our own self-awareness, awareness of the situation and the potential partner and how things are unfolding, identifying red flags, being aware of what a healthy relationship looks like to you. Brilliant conversation, Joanna. Thank you so much for coming on P.S. I Love Me and sharing such an honest account of what you've been through and how you found love after everything that you've been through. You're such an inspiration. If people want to find out a little bit more about you and what you do, where can they find out more?
Well, you can feel free to check me out on Instagram, Wynes Joanna. You can Google my professional website, settlement-expert.com. I have some other, videos that I've done on YouTube. I have my own little mini podcast, I would say, that I just recently started called The Juggle is Real. And if somebody wants to email me, you can look me up in my email. My professional email address is pretty public. So I'm happy to, talk to people if they want to talk and any way that I can help. But Lynda, thank you again for having me. Thank you for all you do for, women, because it's really important. And
thank you so much, Joanna Wynes. It's been a pleasure to have you on P.S. I Love Me. I look forward to seeing what's next for you.
Likewise, Lynda. Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of P.S. I Love Me. I hope you've learned some interesting nuggets to weave into your everyday life to feel a little lighter, brighter, and inspired. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It helps more high-achieving women like yourselves to find us. And don't forget, wherever you are at in life, you are more than enough.